Hello, everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I'm an optometrist at Vision Care Associates in Portland, Oregon. Or at least I was until I submitted my resignation last month. You can call me Dr. Sarah Chen if you want, though most people in the clinic just called me Doc during my 8 years there. I've seen everything you can imagine in eye care: glaucoma, cataracts, macular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy, and every kind of vision problem the human eye can develop. But what I'm about to tell you about is the one case that made me question everything I thought I knew about vision and ultimately led me to leave the profession entirely. Vision Care Associates is a comprehensive eye clinic serving the greater Portland metropolitan area. It's a modern facility built in the early 2000s with 6 examination rooms that handles about 200 patients per week. During my time there, I specialized in difficult cases, particularly patients with unexplained vision changes and complex retinal conditions. I had built a reputation for solving diagnostic puzzles that other optometrists couldn't crack. The case I'm about to describe began on a Tuesday morning in late March 2024. It was shaping up to be a typical day. I had my usual lineup of routine eye exams, a few contact lens fittings, and one patient coming in for a second opinion on what another doctor had diagnosed as early-onset macular degeneration. The weather was overcast and drizzly, classic Portland spring weather that made the fluorescent lights in the clinic seem particularly bright. I had been seeing patients since 8 a.m., and by 10:30, I was running slightly ahead of schedule. My next appointment was listed as Emma Rodriguez, age 34. Chief complaint listed as sudden vision changes. No previous history at our clinic, and the notes from our receptionist indicated she had been very insistent about being seen as soon as possible, even though she was a new patient. When I called Emma into my examination room, I was immediately struck by how nervous she appeared. She was a petite woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a plain blue sweater. But what caught my attention first were her eyes. Even from across the room, I could see that something was unusual about them. They were a striking shade of green, but there was something else, something I couldn't quite identify at first glance. Emma took a seat in the examination chair and immediately began apologizing for taking up my time. "Dr. Chen, I'm so sorry to bother you, but something really strange is happening with my vision, and I don't know what to do. I've been to 2 other eye doctors in the past week, and they both told me everything looks completely normal. But I know something is wrong." I assured her that she wasn't bothering me and asked her to describe what she had been experiencing. Over the past 10 days, she explained, her vision had been changing in ways that she couldn't adequately describe to the previous doctors. It wasn't that things were blurry or that she was seeing floaters or flashes of light. Instead, she said she was seeing things that weren't there, but in a very specific and consistent way. "Emma, can you be more specific about what you mean by seeing things that aren't there?" I asked, pulling up a chair to sit closer to her. "Are you seeing shapes, colors, people, objects?" Her response was unlike anything I had heard before in my career. "Dr. Chen, I'm seeing numbers and letters floating in the air around people, not randomly, but in patterns that seem to mean something. When I look at someone, I see sequences of numbers and letters hovering just above their head or beside them. At first, I thought I was having some kind of breakdown, but the sequences are so consistent and detailed. This was clearly not a typical vision complaint. I had seen patients with visual hallucinations before, usually related to migraines, medication side effects, or neurological conditions. But Emma's description was remarkably specific and organized, not the chaotic visual disturbances typically associated with those conditions. I began my standard examination, starting with her visual acuity. Emma could read the 2015 line on the eye chart with both eyes, which indicated vision that was actually better than normal. Her color vision was perfect, her peripheral vision was completely intact, and her eye movements were smooth and coordinated. When I examined the front of her eyes with my slit lamp microscope, everything appeared normal. Her corneas were clear, her pupils reacted normally to light, and there was no evidence of inflammation or injury. But when I looked into the back of her eyes with my ophthalmoscope, I encountered something that made me pause. Emma's retinas appeared completely healthy, with normal blood vessels, clear optic discs, and no signs of disease or damage. However, there was something about the way light reflected off her retinas that seemed different. The reflection had an almost iridescent quality that I had never seen before, like the surface of a soap bubble or an oil slick on water. "Emma, have you ever had any eye surgeries or injuries?" I asked, still peering into her eyes through the ophthalmoscope. "No, never. I've always had perfect vision. I've never even worn glasses or contacts. That's why this is so scary. I went from having normal vision to seeing these strange patterns literally overnight." I decided to perform additional tests that weren't part of my routine examination. I used a specialized camera to take high-resolution photographs of Emma's retinas, and I performed optical coherence tomography, a test that creates detailed cross-sectional images of the retinal layers. I also conducted visual field testing to map her complete field of vision and check for any blind spots or areas of reduced sensitivity. While we waited for the test results, Emma continued describing her experiences. The numbers and letters she was seeing weren't random characters. They appeared to be organized in specific sequences that seemed to correspond to different people. When she looked at her husband, she consistently saw the same sequence: A7, 9N, 2X, K4. When she looked at her daughter, she saw B3, 1M, 7Y, R8. Each person had their own unique code that never changed. "Dr. Chen, I know this sounds crazy, but I started writing them down. I have a notebook full of these sequences for everyone I've encountered over the past week. My family, my coworkers, strangers at the grocery store, everyone has their own code floating above them." The test results came back, and they were completely normal. Emma's retinal photographs showed healthy tissue with no signs of pathology. The optical coherence tomography revealed normal retinal thickness and structure throughout both eyes. Her visual fields were perfect, with no defects or abnormalities. By every objective measure available to me, Emma Rodriguez had perfectly healthy eyes with excellent vision. But there was still that unusual iridescent quality to her retinal reflection that I couldn't explain. I had seen thousands of retinas over my career, and I had never encountered anything quite like it. It wasn't pathological, it wasn't concerning from a health standpoint, but it was definitely unusual. I spent another hour with Emma, repeating various tests and trying different approaches to understand what might be causing her visual experiences. I tested her with different types of lighting, had her look at various patterns and colors, and even asked her to describe what she was seeing when she looked at me. "Dr. Chen, when I look at you, I see the sequence F58H, 3Z-N9 floating just above your left shoulder. It's been the same sequence every time I've looked at you during this appointment. The numbers and letters are about 2 inches tall. They appear to be glowing with a soft blue light, and they're perfectly clear and stable." I was completely baffled. Emma's eyes were healthy, her vision was excellent, and yet she was experiencing something that had no explanation in any textbook or medical journal I had ever read. Been practicing optometry for over 20 years and had seen more. I decided to consult with my colleague, Dr. Michael Torres, who had unusual cases than anyone else in our clinic. Michael had been practicing optometry for over 20 years and had seen more unusual cases than anyone else in our clinic. When I explained Emma's situation to him, his first reaction was skeptical but professional. He agreed to examine her himself and see if he could identify anything I might have missed. Dr. Torres spent another hour with Emma, conducting his own comprehensive examination. He used different equipment, tried alternative testing methods, and even consulted several reference books during the appointment. When he finished, he pulled me aside with a puzzled expression I'd rarely seen on his face. "Sarah, I've never encountered anything like this. Her eyes are not just normal, they're exceptional. But there's something about the retinal reflection that I can't explain either. It's almost like there's an additional layer of tissue that shouldn't be there, but it's not pathological and it's not interfering with her vision in any measurable way." We decided to refer Emma to Dr. Patricia Williams, a retinal specialist at Oregon Health and Science University who had access to more advanced diagnostic equipment. Dr. Williams had a reputation for solving complex cases and had published research on unusual retinal conditions. If anyone could provide answers, it would be her. Emma's appointment with Dr. Williams was scheduled for the following week, but she called our office 3 days later with an update that made the case even more mysterious. The visual phenomena she had been experiencing were becoming more complex and detailed. Instead of just seeing alphanumeric codes above people, she was now seeing what appeared to be additional information. Dr. Chen, I know you're going to think I'm losing my mind, but the sequences are expanding. When I look at people now, I see the original code, but underneath it, there are numbers that seem to be changing constantly. They look like coordinates or measurements of some kind, and sometimes there are colors associated with different parts of the sequence. I asked Emma to come in immediately for another examination. When she arrived that afternoon, I noticed that the iridescent quality in her retinal reflection had become more pronounced. It was still subtle, but definitely more noticeable than it had been during her initial visit. As I examined her, Emma continued describing what she was seeing. Dr. Chen, your sequence has changed slightly. It's still F58H3ZN9, but now there are additional numbers underneath. 122.7, 98.4, 76.1. And there's a faint green glow around the H. I was taking detailed notes of everything she described, partly for medical documentation, and partly because I was genuinely fascinated by the consistency and specificity of her experiences. These weren't the random, chaotic hallucinations typically associated with neurological or psychiatric conditions. They were organized, systematic, and remarkably detailed. That evening, I spent hours researching medical literature, looking for any documented cases of similar visual phenomena. I searched through databases of ophthalmology journals, neurology publications, and even explored some fringe medical theories. Nothing matched Emma's symptoms exactly, though I did find a few isolated case reports of patients experiencing highly organized visual hallucinations following various triggers. One paper from a neurologist in Switzerland described a patient who began seeing geometric patterns overlaying normal vision after a mild head injury. Another case study from Japan documented a woman who reported seeing text-like symbols floating in her visual field following a viral infection. But none of these cases involved the specific type of alphanumeric sequences Emma was experiencing, and none of the patients had the unusual retinal reflection we were observing. The next morning, I received a call from Dr. Williams's office. They had reviewed Emma's case file and wanted to schedule her for immediate evaluation using their most advanced imaging equipment. Dr. Williams was particularly interested in the retinal reflection anomaly and wanted to use spectral domain optical coherence tomography to get ultra-high resolution images of Emma's retinal structure. Emma's appointment at OHSU was scheduled for that same afternoon. Dr. Williams was a tall, imposing woman with gray hair and intense blue eyes who had earned her reputation through decades of research into rare retinal conditions. She greeted Emma professionally, but with obvious curiosity about her unusual case. The examination at OHSU was far more comprehensive than anything we could perform at our clinic. Dr. Williams used equipment I'd only read about in journals, including adaptive optics, imaging that could visualize individual photoreceptor cells, and fluorescent angiography to map blood flow in the retinal vessels with extraordinary detail. After 3 hours of testing, Dr. Williams called me to discuss the results. Sarah, I have to admit, this case has me completely stumped. The imaging shows retinal structure that is not just normal, but optimal. Emma's photoreceptor density is actually higher than average, and the organization of her retinal cells is remarkably precise. But there's definitely something unusual happening at the cellular level that our equipment can't quite capture. She explained that the spectral domain OCT had revealed what appeared to be an additional thin layer of tissue between Emma's photoreceptors and the retinal pigment epithelium. This layer was so thin that it was barely detectable, and it didn't correspond to any known retinal anatomy. More puzzling still, this mysterious layer seemed to have optical properties that were unlike anything in normal eye structure. Dr. Williams had also performed electroretinography, which measures the electrical responses of various cell types in the retina to light stimulation. Emma's results showed patterns that were completely outside the normal range, but not in a way that indicated disease or dysfunction. Instead, her retinal cells were responding to light stimuli, with electrical activity that was more complex and organized than typical human retinal responses. The fluorescein angiography revealed another anomaly. While Emma's retinal blood vessels appeared completely normal in structure and function, the dye revealed areas of the retina that seemed to be metabolically more active than expected. These areas formed subtle patterns across both retinas that Dr. Williams had never seen before in 30 years of practice. Most intriguing of all, when Dr. Williams used polarized light ophthalmoscopy, a specialized technique that reveals details about tissue organization, Emma's retinas showed interference patterns that suggested the presence of organized crystalline structures within the retinal tissue. These structures were microscopic and didn't interfere with vision, but they were definitely present and definitely unusual. Dr. Williams scheduled Emma for follow-up appointments and recommended that she undergo genetic testing to see if there might be some rare inherited condition that could explain her symptoms. She also suggested consulting with neurologists and geneticists who specialized in unusual visual processing disorders. Meanwhile, Emma's visual experiences continued to evolve. She called me a week later to report that the alphanumeric sequences she was seeing had become even more complex, and that she was beginning to notice patterns in the data that seemed meaningful. Dr. Chen, I think the sequences might actually mean something. I've been keeping detailed records, and I'm starting to see correlations between the codes and certain characteristics of the people I'm observing. It's almost like I'm seeing some kind of biological or genetic information displayed visually. This revelation sent a chill down my spine. If Emma was somehow visually accessing genetic or biological information about people, it would represent a form of perception that had no precedent in medical science. The implications were staggering and frankly terrifying. I scheduled another appointment with Emma to discuss her observations in detail and to document everything she was experiencing. When she arrived at my office the following day, I immediately noticed that her eyes had changed again. The iridescent quality was now clearly visible even without specialized equipment, and her pupils seemed to react to light in a slightly different way than before. As we talked, Emma described how the visual phenomena had become an integral part of her perception. She could no longer look at a person without seeing their associated code and data streams. The information appeared instantly and remained stable as long as she maintained visual contact. Dr. Chen, I need to ask you something, and I hope you won't think I'm crazy. Based on the sequence I see when I look at you, I believe you have a genetic predisposition to developing glaucoma in your left eye specifically, probably within the next 5 to 7 years. The numbers seem to indicate elevated intraocular pressure that isn't clinically apparent yet. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I had family history of glaucoma on my mother's side, something I monitored carefully but hadn't shared with Emma or included in any records she would have access to. More disturbing still, my most recent eye pressure readings had been at the upper limit of normal, a detail I'd been quietly concerned about but hadn't discussed with anyone. How could you possibly know that? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Emma, there's no way you could have that information just by looking at me. I don't know how I know it, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But the data is right there, floating beside your head. It's as clear to me as your face or your hair color. The sequence shows genetic markers, risk factors, timeline predictions. I can see similar information for everyone now. I excused myself from the examination room and stepped into the hallway, my hands trembling. This was beyond anything I had encountered in medical school or practice. Emma wasn't just experiencing unusual visual phenomena, she was apparently accessing information that should have been impossible to obtain through vision alone. When I returned to the room, I decided to test Emma's claims more systematically. I asked her to look at our receptionist, Maria, who had worked at the clinic for 3 years. Emma studied Maria for a moment and then began describing a sequence of numbers and letters, along with additional information that she claimed to see overlaying Maria's form. According to Emma's visual data, Maria had a genetic predisposition to type 2 diabetes, carried a recessive gene for color blindness that could be passed to her children, and had recently been exposed to a viral infection that her immune system was successfully fighting off. When I discreetly asked Maria about her family medical history later that day, she confirmed that diabetes ran in her family and that her brother was colorblind. Over the following weeks, Emma's accuracy in describing medical and genetic information about people became unnervingly consistent. She could identify individuals who were in early stages of pregnancy before they knew it themselves, spot genetic conditions that hadn't yet manifested symptoms, and even predict with remarkable precision when someone was developing an illness days before they felt sick. Word of Emma's case began to spread through the medical community, though I tried to keep the details confidential. Dr. Williams had consulted with colleagues at major medical centers across the country, and Emma's case was generating significant interest among researchers who specialized in unusual neurological and ophthalmological conditions. The genetic testing results came back with findings that were just as puzzling as everything else about Emma's case. Her DNA showed several mutations in genes associated with retinal development and visual processing, but these weren't pathological mutations. Instead, they appeared to be variations that enhanced rather than impaired normal function. The geneticist who reviewed her results described them as evolutionary advantages rather than medical conditions. Dr. Chen, Emma said during one of our weekly follow-up appointments, "I need to show you something that I think will help explain what's happening to me." She pulled out a notebook filled with detailed drawings and diagrams. "I've been documenting everything I see, and I think I'm beginning to understand the pattern." The notebook contained hundreds of pages of meticulously recorded observations. Emma had created what appeared to be a comprehensive database of genetic and biological information for every person she had encountered over the past month. The level of detail was extraordinary, with complex charts showing genetic markers, health predictions, and even what appeared to be genealogical connections between different individuals. More disturbing still, Emma had begun to notice that she could see similar information about herself when she looked in a mirror. According to her own visual data, she was carrying genetic modifications that weren't present in standard human DNA. The sequences she saw when looking at her reflection included markers that didn't correspond to any known human genes. "I think something is changing in my genetic structure, Dr. Chen. The information I see about myself shows modifications happening in real time. It's like my DNA is being rewritten, and whatever is doing the rewriting is also giving me the ability to see genetic information in others." This revelation was terrifying. If Emma was correct, she wasn't just experiencing unusual vision. She was undergoing some kind of genetic transformation that was enhancing her perceptual abilities in ways that science couldn't explain. The implications were staggering and raised questions about human evolution, genetic modification, and the nature of perception itself. I decided to involve additional specialists, including a molecular biologist from Portland State University and a neurologist who specialized in synesthesia and unusual perceptual conditions. Both experts examined Emma extensively and confirmed that something unprecedented was occurring, though neither could offer explanations for her condition. The molecular biologist, Dr. Rachel Kim, was particularly intrigued by Emma's case. After reviewing all of her test results and genetic analyses, Dr. Kim proposed a theory that was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. "Dr. Chen," she said during our consultation, "what if Emma represents the next step in human evolution? The genetic modifications she's displaying aren't random mutations. They're highly organized enhancements to visual processing and genetic recognition systems. It's almost as if her DNA is being upgraded by some external influence." External influence? What do you mean by that? I mean that the changes in Emma's genetic structure are too precise and too beneficial to be natural mutations. They appear to be engineered modifications, but engineered by what or whom, I have no idea. The technology required to make these kinds of changes to human DNA in a living organism is decades beyond our current capabilities. As Emma's condition continued to evolve, she began experiencing new phenomena that went beyond visual perception. She started reporting that she could sense emotional and psychological states in the people around her, information that appeared to her as color-coded auras surrounding their bodies. She claimed she could identify individuals who were lying, predict behavioral changes, and even sense connections between people that weren't immediately apparent. "Dr. Chen, when I look at you now, I can see that you're planning to leave optometry. The data shows stress patterns, career dissatisfaction, and a decision timeline that indicates you'll resign within the next few weeks. I can also see that this case, My case is the primary factor influencing your decision. Once again, Emma's perception was unnervingly accurate. I'd been struggling with the implications of her case for weeks, questioning everything I thought I knew about vision and human perception. The idea that there might be others like Emma, or that her condition might be spreading, had been keeping me awake at night. More troubling still, Emma reported seeing similar genetic modifications in a small number of other individuals she'd encountered around Portland. According to her visual data, there were at least a dozen people in the metropolitan area who carried genetic markers similar to her own, though none of them seemed to have developed the enhanced perceptual abilities she was experiencing. I think there are others like me, Dr. Chen, but they're in earlier stages of whatever transformation I'm undergoing. The genetic markers are there, but they haven't activated yet. It's like they're waiting for some kind of trigger. The possibility that Emma's condition might be part of a larger phenomenon affecting multiple individuals was the final factor that convinced me to leave optometry. I realized that I was dealing with something far beyond the scope of medical practice, something that challenged fundamental assumptions about human biology and perception. Emma's case had attracted attention from government agencies and research institutions that I preferred not to identify. People in dark suits had begun asking questions about her condition, and I started feeling like I was being watched. The pressure to turn over Emma's medical records and research data became intense, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the case was taken out of my hands entirely. During our final appointment together, Emma looked directly at me with those unnaturally iridescent eyes and said, "Dr. Chen, thank you for believing me and for documenting everything so carefully. What's happening to me is just the beginning. The genetic modifications I'm seeing in others are spreading, and eventually there will be many more people like me." She paused and tilted her head slightly, as if reading invisible information in the air around me. "You made the right decision to leave optometry. What's coming next is going to change everything we understand about human perception and consciousness. You don't want to be involved when the real questions start getting asked." I submitted my resignation the following week and moved to a small town in eastern Oregon, where I now work as a general practitioner treating routine medical conditions. I've never spoken publicly about Emma's case until now, and I've avoided any involvement with ophthalmology or vision research. But I still think about Emma Rodriguez every day. I wonder what became of her, whether her abilities continued to develop, and how many others might be experiencing similar transformations. Most of all, I wonder if what I witnessed represents the future of human evolution or something far more sinister. Sometimes, late at night, I catch myself looking carefully at my patient's eyes, searching for that telltale iridescent reflection that might indicate they're developing enhanced perceptual abilities. So far, I haven't seen anything unusual, but Emma's warnings about the spreading genetic modifications echo in my mind. I've kept detailed records of everything that happened during those months, hidden away in a safe deposit box, along with copies of Emma's test results and genetic analyses. Someday, when the world is ready for the truth about what human perception might be capable of, those records might prove valuable to researchers who are brave enough to investigate these phenomena. Until then, I practice routine medicine in a quiet town and try not to think about the implications of what I witnessed in Portland. But Emma Rodriguez and her impossible eyes will haunt me for the rest of my career. A reminder that human biology holds mysteries that science is nowhere near ready to understand. The most disturbing part of this entire experience wasn't Emma's impossible abilities or the government interest in her case. It was what happened during my very last week of practice, when I realized that Emma might have been right about the genetic modifications spreading to others. I was seeing a routine patient, Jennifer Walsh, a 28-year-old teacher who had come in for a standard contact lens fitting. As I was examining her eyes with my ophthalmoscope, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, barely perceptible, but definitely present, was the faint beginning of that same iridescent reflection I had first observed in Emma's retinas. Jennifer had no unusual visual symptoms. She wasn't seeing alphanumeric codes or accessing genetic information about people around her. Her vision was normal, her eye health was perfect, and she had no complaints whatsoever. But that subtle shimmer in her retinal reflection was unmistakably similar to what I had documented in Emma's case. I tried to remain calm and professional, but my hands were trembling as I completed the examination. When I asked Jennifer if she'd experienced any changes in her vision recently, she mentioned something that sent chills down my spine. Doctor Chen, this might sound weird, but lately I've been having really vivid dreams where I can see information about people, like their thoughts or feelings displayed as text floating around them. I always wake up before I can make sense of what the text says, but the dreams are so realistic that sometimes I'm surprised when I can't see that information when I'm awake. I documented everything about Jennifer's case, added her information to my hidden records, and made a note that she should be monitored closely for any developing visual anomalies. But I knew I wouldn't be the one doing that monitoring. My resignation was already submitted, and I had no intention of staying involved with whatever was happening in Portland. 3 days later, I received a phone call that confirmed my worst fears. Dr. Torres called me at home, his voice tight with concern. Sarah, we've had 2 more patients this week with retinal reflections similar to what you documented in the Rodriguez case. Neither of them has developed any unusual visual symptoms yet, but the similarity is unmistakable. I think you were right to get out when you did. After that conversation, I stopped answering calls from my former colleagues. I packed my medical records, my research notes, and Emma's documentation into several boxes that I stored in 3 different safe deposit boxes across 2 states. I wanted to make sure that if something happened to me, the information would still be available to researchers who might someday understand what we had witnessed. That was 2 years ago, and I've never returned to eye care. I still practice general medicine in my quiet town, treating diabetes and high blood pressure, conditions that follow predictable patterns and have established treatments. Sometimes patients ask why I left optometry, and I tell them I wanted a change of pace. They nod and accept that explanation because it sounds reasonable. But late at night, when I'm lying in bed unable to sleep, I wonder how many people like Emma are out there now. I wonder if those genetic modifications she talked about have continued spreading, if more people are developing abilities that science can't explain. Most of all, I wonder if humanity is ready for what might be coming next. I've never shared Emma's story until today, and I probably never should have. But if you're watching this video and you've experienced anything similar to what I've described, you're not alone. Document everything, trust your instincts, and remember that sometimes the most impossible cases are the ones that change everything we thought we knew about being human. Those iridescent eyes still haunt my dreams, and I suspect they always will.